Hey everybody, how's it going? So a lot of you have asked me what I think of the MTA ridership over the past few months. The MTA is who runs the trains and buses here in New York City, as well as, I believe, the Staten Island Ferry. I have been taking the trains and buses since I was, what was it, about like 12 or 13 years old. So that dates back to around 2001. And I stopped taking them in around 2018 when I built my electric bike. So I took the trains and subways around the city as my main means of transportation for about 17 years. And in the beginning of this business, before I was able to afford an office or a store, I did house calls. So I would wake up around 7 in the morning and get home at 1 a.m. the next morning, just taking the train from customer to customer to customer to customer all day long. So I was fairly familiar with the train routes in the city and the bus routes. And one thing that's pretty interesting is when you look at the MTA's website and their data, you can see that for the past few weeks, even though it is the summertime, the percentage change from the pre-pandemic equivalent day, meaning how many riders they had versus this time, let's say 2 years ago, is still pretty low. So on Friday, July 9th, you had 57%. Monday, July 12th, you had 57%. Tuesday, July 13th, you had 55%. Now, you would expect it to be pretty low around July 4th and 5th because, though, that's when people are leaving the city to see their family and celebrating the holiday. But you must keep in mind that they're comparing these numbers with the exact same day 2 years ago, so even the holiday wouldn't really be affecting it that much. And you still have, on average over here, less than 55% of the ridership. 57. So less than half of the ridership from just 2 years ago, even though COVID is starting to leave. So when you take a look at the COVID cases and deaths in particular, you can see here in New York, not even just New York City, but New York State, it was pretty bad last year in April, when you had 800 or 1,000 deaths a day. And do keep in mind, those numbers are not even complete because we didn't have great testing back then. But when you look over here, this is, you have 9, 2 deaths in a day, 7, 5. Every death is a tragedy, but when you have a state with 20 million people, we're at the point where, since we've been able to get vaccines out to virtually every pharmacy near anybody in the city, freely available for anybody who wants one for months now, we're at a point where it's really interesting to see that these numbers are still as low as they are. And I think there are a number of different reasons for that. I want to try to avoid any sort of univariate single analysis of this, but I think there's numerous contributing factors going into this. I think one of these factors ties into something I talked about a few months ago. I walked by this restaurant and it said that they closed because they couldn't find anybody. And I said, in a city of 8 million people, no, this was not the first place I've seen like this, where they had help wanted signs or job ads up, but they weren't able to find anybody. Now, there were people saying that this is because of the extended unemployment benefits. If someone can get up to $15 an hour for 40 hours a week to stay home and do nothing, then how are you going to get them to go back to work for like 16 or 17 bucks an hour? That's not going to happen. So the entry level or lower jobs from the businesses that can't afford to pay better, in particular, small shops like this that exist in poverty-stricken or low-income neighborhoods, where people are probably not going to pay $15 for breakfast, that wouldn't be able to pay. A bunch of other people were saying that people are sick and tired of poverty wages. They're tired of the fact that, an apartment is $2,500 and their wages, when you take out taxes, are $1,800 or $2,000. Who wants to bust their ass for $2,000 a month when an apartment is $2,600 a month and you're still under the poverty line? You have to have a roommate, like I did when I first started out in life, which is, I think it's totally reasonable that if somebody has a low to no skill set, that if they move out, they're probably going to have a roommate if they want to live in, one of the largest, most famous cities in the world. That's fine. But even if you do have a roommate in a $2,600 apartment or a $2,700 apartment, it's $1,300 after taxes. You may be making $1,800 or $1,900. You have a couple of bills to pay. You're kind of destitute. And I think what's happening is that after last year, what people are realizing is if I work my ass off, I bust my ass, I do a good job, I do what I'm supposed to do, I work 40 hours a week, and then I have, an hour each day or 2 hours each day just for commuting. I spend most of my time working, and I can't save. I really have no money that I can put away. I can't save. My quality of life is low because I live in a shitty apartment in a shitty area. And at the end of the day, why? I mean, if I'm getting, because here's the thing, when the pandemic hit and there was a pause order, first back when there was that fantasy that we had a 3% mortality rate from COVID, remember that? Anyway, people were worried. What if I die? Oh my God, what if I die? I can't afford health care. I'm screwed. I can't even go to the doctor if anything happens to me as a result of this because I have no money left to afford $300 or $400 a month for health care. Because after I pay my apartment rent, I make $1,800 or $1,900 after taxes. My rent's $13. I'm screwed. And also, when it comes to the wages of the job in general, they're fairly low. So I think a lot of people are just checking out, and they're saying, if I'm going to be miserable, if I'm going to be destitute, if I'm going to have no way of paying my rent, I've been working at this place for 3 or 5 years, one little thing happens that causes me to lose my ability to work, and I only have 1 month of rent saved after 5 years because that's all I could afford, why bother? Why keep taking part in a system that embarrasses me or humiliates me? And I think something similar has happened with subway ridership. I took the subway for over 17 years, and it's disgusting. I mean, it's just a fact. This is not even, I don't even think this is subjective at this point. So again, people say that I cherry pick when I walk around and I show you the city. Let me show you a subway station in one of the most expensive areas of the city. This is one of the most highly invested in areas. This is around Chambers Street, around the financial district in southern Manhattan. This is where you have all your Wall Street investment banks. This is where you have headquarters for a lot of Fortune 500 companies. There's a lot of concentrated wealth and money in that area by Wall Street. And this is one of the subway stations in one of the areas with more concentrated wealth than anywhere in the country. It looks like a pile of steaming absolute garbage. This looks like a steaming pile of absolute garbage, and it's right by there. Look at this. Look at this. This is decrepit. This is disgusting. This is falling apart. And when you're sitting there for 10 or 20 minutes waiting for your train with no air conditioning in the summer and with no heat in the winter, freezing or like sweating your ass off waiting for this train to come, that very often comes late because the trains never run on time here, or they break, or they stop working, or they just stop coming to your station after you waited for 30 minutes, and the only way you figured this out is by an announcement from some stupid overhead horn that you can barely hear because the PA system was put in probably 80 years ago, is that this is somewhat depressing. You're just sitting there waiting in this area that looks decrepit. And one of the things that I noticed when I stopped taking the subway is that my mental health actually improved a little bit from taking my electric bike and riding it around. I really should have done that earlier because it's something that I didn't realize. But when I spend 40 to 50 minutes of my day staring at stuff that looks like this, it actually does kind of get me down a little bit in a way that I don't get down when I'm on my little electric bike and I can see things and I get fresh air and I can see scenery and I'm riding over the Williamsburg Bridge and I can see over the water and I can see the buildings. It's nicer than seeing this. And I remember I used to take the L train when I lived in Canarsie in the very beginning, all the way to the last stop. You know, my shop was on 30th Street and 8th Avenue where I was sharing a space with other people, and my apartment was in Canarsie around Remsen Avenue. And the issue was the L train very often wouldn't go past Lorimer. Or if it would go past Lorimer, you'd definitely get one of those announcements after it stalled at Myrtle Wyckoff for 10 or 20 minutes at a time, often in between stations so you couldn't even get out if you wanted to, that it wasn't going to be going any further and you need to take a shuttle bus that takes forever. The G train would often stop working on weekends or not go after 11 o'clock, so you'd have to get into a shuttle bus where you have about 110 people on a bus and they're all jammed together. If you're taking the F train home, F train is one of the worst trains in the city, one of the least reliable trains in the city, particularly if you're going to Gravesend. You know, it would just skip Avenue U constantly. If you lived along Avenue U, you got screwed all the time. This train is going all the way to Coney Island, or this train is stopping at, I think Kings Highway or something. It's just horrible. And I think after a certain period of time, in addition to the fact that people don't want to feel like they're demeaning themselves for a job that treats them like shit, I also think that people are just kind of checking out in general from every experience in society where they just feel like they're being demeaned. And I don't even think this just has to do with crappy restaurant jobs. Of course, obviously, inflation, the extended unemployment benefits is most certainly one factor. And as an employer, I've spoken to people where I'm willing to pay them considerably more than what they're getting from extended unemployment. And I've had people ask me, can you pay me under the books because I want to keep this? If I don't, then I'm not going to take the job. And it's, I've had this happen to me over the past year with hiring. And, of course, the ability to get about $500 or $600 a week to sit home and do nothing is going to contribute. That's one factor, though, and to have a univariate analysis is not something that that explains everything. And I find too many people seek to explain things with univariate analysis. A part of it, I believe, and one is that people just don't want to go back to experiences that demean them, particularly groups of people that are already screwed. So again, if you're living paycheck to paycheck, you're screwed. You're like, when something happens like COVID, you're screwed. You're at the mercy of the government. You're at the mercy of charity and other people to be able to pay your bills. Because even if you're working 40 hours a week and have a roommate, you've probably over 2 or 3 or 4 years only been able to save maybe a couple of $1,000. So that can last you a month or two. And as you can see, the COVID crap in the city is in some ways still not over. A lot of these businesses are still closed. A lot of the restrictions only just got lifted a few months ago. So you would have had to been able to last a year. And that's something a lot of people can't do. So I think a lot of people are just fundamentally checking out of experiences that they believe demean them. They were willing to do it. They were willing to run in that little hamster wheel. But at some point, after years of running in the hamster wheel, realizing that when something goes off the rails, or when the wheel just kind of gets tossed off, that they're absolutely screwed and left to fend for themselves. Like, if they're going to be screwed, they might as well be screwed but not demean themselves at the same time. If I'm going to be financially destroyed and destitute, which many people have been over the past year, if I'm going to be financially screwed and destitute, at the very least, I'm going to be financially screwed, destitute, and poor, not working a job that I hate. If I'm going to be financially screwed, destitute, and poor, at the very least, I'm going to be screwed, financially destitute, and poor, not spending an hour looking at this. And I think you're going to see this in more areas of life, not just the subway, not just crappy minimum wage jobs, not just stuff like that. I think you're going to see people checking out of a lot of areas of society that they were just kind of tolerating, but that they didn't want to tolerate. And I think that's going to be kind of interesting to see how many more areas this occurs in. With COVID and with the subway ridership, this is also something that I think is going to spiral considerably out of control. The city's budget and just how they dealt with the MTA has been horrible for decades. The MTA has no idea how to manage money. Even in spite of the fact that the trains were full every single day, they still did not have the money to do basic routine maintenance. They didn't have the money to make any of this not look like a crumbling shithole. And it wasn't for lack of ridership, because as I said, if you got on these trains, even at 10 or 11 o'clock at night, depending on the train you're on, there could be 80 people in that car. You could be sandwiched in like this where you're next to a bunch of other people and you literally cannot move. That is something that is quite common, particularly if you're getting on the L train at Lorimer Street right before it gets to Manhattan during rush hour. You want to try to get the L train at 9:30 in the morning at Lorimer Street back in 2018 or 2019. Best of luck. You're going to be squeezed in with 20 people, or stay in this little space that's probably the size of my chair. I think a lot of people are just fundamentally checking out of those types of experiences. And since the MTA was put together in a manner where they could not handle their budget, even when they had full ridership, what are they going to do when they have 50% ridership? They're going to be screwed. And the MTA is not particularly good with handling their finances in general for a number of different reasons. So, for instance, something I went over in an old video, there was a gentleman that received over $400,000 in overtime in 1 year. He was a rail worker. Now, I'm not saying that people shouldn't make a living wage, nor am I saying that this type of blue-collar work shouldn't be valued. I believe that we undervalue the work of plumbers, electricians, and tradesmen in this country, particularly in this state, in favor of looking at people that do all this high-end coding and tech jobs, which are just, at the end of the day, at least until we have robots doing everything, not going to allow you to flush your toilet when you take a shit, and are not going to build housing for you. I think that these jobs should be valued. That being said, $461,000 for a rail worker in 1 year? Come on. You know that there's rampant corruption going on within the MTA. There's been tons of stories about rampant corruption going on within the MTA, and it's probably going to continue for a long time. And I think that they're going to be forced to shed a light on it now that they really fundamentally don't have the money for anything anymore. There's no hiding it. And it says here in this article, one night 2 years ago, Thomas Caputo, a senior track worker for the Long Island Railroad, put in 15 hours of overtime for work he said he had done at the West Side Yard in Manhattan. His shift began at 4 p.m. and ended at 7 in the morning. But the authorities say Mr. Caputo was somewhere else that evening, a bowling alley, more than 55 miles away, where he bowled 3 games, averaging a score of 196. Not bad for a guy that was getting paid by the MTA to be there. And there's a lot of issues with the MTA. And I don't think that this is definitely not good for public transportation in the city. You're probably going to see a lot of these services get cut. They were already bad as it is. As I said, even when they had full ridership on so many trains, you would hear there's no service past this point. There's no service past that point. And often it wasn't scheduled. It was a surprise because they'd have issues with signaling or switching. And with the amount of issues they had, I can only imagine that the work that was being done was patchwork at best, not a full solution. And that was going on throughout the city. Now you have a lot of people that just, they can't afford the time to ride their bike 15 or 25 miles from job to job if they don't have one that's electric. And a lot of people can't even afford an electric bike. I mean, even if we're just talking about a shitty Arrow 7 or an Arrow 9, you want to get one of those used, like, I don't know, like $1,300, $1,600. You can find them sometimes for $500 or $600, but it's in horrible condition. But that's the equivalent for a lot of people of 5 to 10 months of their Metro card fare, and a lot of people don't have the money to spend that up front. A car is most certainly a luxury if you're poor, but even an electric bike can be somewhat of a luxury, even if you're building it yourself with the cost of the components, even if you're just getting something like a used Arrow 7. So this is going to wind up hitting people really hard on the bottom income bracket, but I think that the message that it's sending, the message that all these little factors are sending, it's not just about people being afraid of getting sick from COVID. Because again, when you look at these numbers, when you look at the behavior of people in the city, when you walk around Times Square, just look at the videos that I do where I'm walking around and showing you things. People en masse are not behaving like we're here anymore. They're behaving like we're here, which is what we are. And the streets are filled with people. You have people walking around everywhere. You have traffic going back and forth constantly. So it's not that people aren't going out anymore. It's that people don't want to look at this every day anymore. I think people are just checking out of experiences that they do not want to experience. And I think you're going to see that happening more and more and more as time goes on. I think this was a wake-up call for a lot of people, that if I'm in a place in my life where I'm not happy, at any moment in time, I could lose my job, lose my career, lose everything. And if I'm going to be miserable, at the very least, I'm going to be miserable on my terms. I'm not going to be miserable on somebody else's. Let me know what you think in the comments down below. That's it for today. And as always, I hope you learned something. I'll see you all in the next video. Bye now.